everybody, and welcome. Let me just see a show of hands. How many of you have had a patient safety course in your medical school or residency? Oh, good, very good. Well, that's a new trend. Last year, I think there were only internally Hopkins-trained people who we saw had one, so this is delighting. I will say to you that the application of the material that you're going to hear in this session, and hopefully you retain some of it, will have by far the biggest impact on your patients over your career than any new discovery. This is the MRI scan of a surgeon in training. She woke up one morning with tingling in her hands and a headache and went to get a CAT scan which showed a tumor. And then she had an MRI scan, a functional MRI, which measured the blood flow in her brain, as you're probably aware of these scans. So she curled her hand so that she wouldn't lose her hand function. And what they found is that where they were going to cut would have destroyed the use of her hand. So they went through a longer section of brain, though less active, and she woke up without any defects. I mean, this is an example of the true miracles that biomedical science has delivered and that you will use. And yet, this same U.S. healthcare system can't get the technology right to prevent leaving a sponge in a patient. Right? And it seems to be so contrasting to say, here you have this most amazing discovery that we've sequenced the human genome, we put in artificial hearts, we've nearly cured childhood leukemias. But we make an awful lot of mistakes. We make mistakes such that on average, 50% of patients get the evidence that they're supposed to in this country. Well over 100,000, probably closer to 200,000 or 300,000 people die each year from preventable harm. And so how do we reconcile that? Well, I think there's two things for you to think about that. One is that we fail to view the delivery of healthcare as science. The delivery of healthcare has to date been an art. You find genes, you find therapies, but then how you deliver them, it's up to you. You be creative and you're an art. And that has been a disaster. It's why we have this many people being harmed. But perhaps the second and more fundamental for you is we have to admit that we're fallible. That one of the conundrums of medicine is that it's a field that grew up with heroism, and the heroism has led to an awful lot of discoveries. But that heroism really hinders us in trying to design safe systems because we still believe we can be perfect. And until we admit that we're going to make a mistake, we'll never design systems to catch those mistakes. It's what the fundamental reason why aviation has become safety is they admitted they're going to be tired, they're going to pull the wrong knob. And so they still do that an awful lot, but they catch it. In healthcare, we have a really, really poor history of doing that. We do it in my field. I'm a professor in anesthesiology and critical care, and we used to kill an awful lot of people each year from hooking the wrong gases together in the back of the anesthesia machine. So we would hook oxygen to nitrous oxide. We can't do that anymore because we changed the shape of the connectors. They physically don't fit together. And yet, every year in this hospital and around the world, we harm someone from putting a pulmonary artery catheter, a Swan-Ganz catheter, in too far in the neck. And we know that if that catheter is in beyond 60 centimeters, it's a risk for rupturing the pulmonary artery. And you would think that if we bought this concept that we're imperfect, we would put a hub at 60 that says, stop, think about it, you're probably in too far, but we don't. And the reason we don't, I think, is fundamentally because we still think we can be perfect, that we can beat the odds, that we know better. And until we accept that, we're not going to make much progress. Now, the harm from safety is real. The numbers, I think, are almost numbing. This is a little girl who could be a picture of my daughter. They're both born around the same time, but it's not. It's a little girl, Josie King, who died here of preventable mistakes. Essentially, she died of dehydration, a third world disease in the world's best hospital that you will be practicing at. And we have to say, how could we prevent this from ever happening again? And I think once you accept that you're fallible, and hopefully you accept that, I want to put forth to you, there's 4 key concepts of safety that you need to keep in your head as you practice medicine. They're nothing esoteric, they're in some ways relatively mundane. The first is we have to get away from this idea that personal performance or my own effort drives everything, but rather what drives things is the system. And there's this quote in business and quality that says every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. Every system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it gets. So let's think about that. I'm a runner, and I train for marathons, and I have a time that I do for marathons. And my time is a product of the system that I do to train. Some of that is genetic, I can't change. Some of that's my environment. Some of that is my personal effort and my personal responsibility. Some of it's my size and height. Some of it's how hard I train and the schedule I have training. Some of it's how many hours I spend in this place. But together, that system determines what my performance is going to be. And if I want to improve, I'm going to have to change pieces of that. What we've done in healthcare is we think that that personal effort controls everything. And in some sense, we're really, really blessed to have that because we have people like you and nurses in the hospital and doctors who really care deeply. I mean, there's this overwhelming value of benevolence in healthcare. The problem is it's not very effective if that's the only thing you do to change a system. The second thing is I want you to understand some really basic principles of safe design. Really basic. And they are standardize when you could, create independent checks when things or checklists to make sure you do things that are important. And when things go wrong, rather than chucking them off as the way they are, have a way to learn from them. The next idea is to understand that those principles don't just apply to your technical work. They apply, perhaps more importantly, to your teamwork. And we'll go through each of these in detail. And then finally, and perhaps most importantly for you as interns, to recognize that healthcare is a team sport. And there's overwhelming evidence that teams make wise decisions when there's diverse and independent input. So speak up, listen to the nurses, listen to the patients. If you're an attending, listen to others, because you're ultimately going to make a wiser decision the more lenses you have. So let's dive into each of these. I gave you my training example. I want to give you an example from healthcare. We published this in the Annals of Internal Medicine. There was a fellow pulled a catheter, a dialysis catheter, out of a patient's neck when they were in a sitting position. The patient suffered an air embolism and arrested. And so the initial review of that case was, that stupid resident, why'd you pull the catheter in their sitting? We know we're not supposed to. And essentially scold him or encourage him to do better. But teasing apart the systems and saying, well, what is the other pieces that might play into this? Training, supervision, sleep deprivation, teamwork. Turns out that fellow was never trained in how to pull these catheters. And we had no certification program to ensure that they were competent to do this. We had a see one, do one, teach one mentality, which is a system that's perfectly designed to produce air embolisms. And the nurse was really uncomfortable because she knew that we never pull these catheters sitting, but we didn't have a written protocol to back her, and she didn't want to speak up and criticize the physician because the last time she did it, she got her head bit off and just said, it's not really, I don't want to be put in that situation again, so she stayed silent. And as a result, we have a patient who suffered an air embolism. And what I think this case is so nice to say, what looks simple as a, quote, dumb doc or as a physician mistake is essentially the physician was set up, that they worked in a system that wasn't adequately preparing them. Now, if the physician wasn't comfortable, they also have that personal effort in training to say, no, 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 I'm not competent, I got to make sure I do this, please keep an eye on me. And so that doesn't leave personal responsibility off the hook, but personal responsibility is one system of many.